never should have come here.
Hey there folks, it's Blue here at Blue Bears Games, and for today's video I'm going to show you a build that was custom ordered as a gift for someone using Torens, Fist of the Angels as the commander. So this build came about because in one of the Facebook groups, someone had posted about getting a deck for their nephew as a gift, but didn't know anything about the game. After being told many different things that they could do, a couple of players who used my custom deck making service before pointed out what I do and told them to contact me. After about a day of mulling over the options, they decided to go with yours truly. Having no knowledge of the game, I had to ask for any info that they could obtain that would help lead me in some sort of a direction. I was told that Torens is currently one of their favorite cards, but that was about all they could find out. So, my task was to build a Torens Fist of the Angels deck with a budget that was about up to $200. Naturally, I like to go below budget when I can, and they were okay with this. So after all was said and done, this turned out to be a very nice budget build at about $130. So let's talk about Torens real quick. Torens is a 3-mana, 2/2 legendary human cleric with 2 abilities. The first is Training, which states that whenever this creature attacks with another creature with a greater power, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. The second ability says that whenever you cast a creature spell, you create a 1/1 green and white human soldier creature token with Training. I wasn't actually told what about this creature that was liked, so the approach I took was to include aspects of both abilities into the build. That turned this into a human tribal / typal build with sub-themes of token creation and +1/+1 counters. The good thing about this was that these 3 strategies gel together seamlessly. So let me show you exactly what I came up with. I'll start off by showing you the land base. One of the cool things that you're going to see here is that since the budget was a little higher than my normal budget stuff, you're going to see some cards that are usually suggestions I give for upgrades. So let me start. First things off, we're going to go with Command Tower. It's a 2-color deck, so it's very helpful. Sun Petal Grove, it's one of the things I always suggest in all upgrades for lands. It's a check land, so it comes into play untapped if you already control a forest or plains, and then it taps to add white or green. Brushland is a pain land, another thing I usually suggest as an upgrade. It comes into play untapped, taps to add a colorless, and then it can tap to add a white or a green, but it deals the damage to you. Canopy Vista, it's a both forest and plains, so it taps to add green or white, and it comes into play tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands, so it can come into play untapped. Fortified Village, it comes into play tapped unless you reveal from your hand a forest or a plains, and then of course it taps to add either a green or a white. Castle Ardenvale, it enters tapped unless you control plains, taps to add a white, and then it has an ability that creates 1/1 white human creature tokens, which is great for this deck. Riftstone Portal is something I'm playing with. It comes into play untapped and then taps to add a colorless, or if it's for some reason in your graveyard, it actually allows all of your lands to tap to add either a white or green. So if somebody is a mill deck and it mills your stuff over, it's great for that. Crows and Verge comes into play tapped, taps to add a colorless, then you can pay 2, tap and sack it. So go search your library for a forest card and a plains card and put them on the battlefield tapped. So really good for fetching 2 lands that you will need. Gavany Township comes into play untapped, taps to add a colorless, and then for 4 and tapping it, you can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, which is absolutely part of the plan for this deck. Same thing with Karn's Bastion, absolutely part of the plan. It comes into play untapped, taps to add a colorless, and you can pay 4, tap it, and proliferate, which means you can put a counter on everything that has a counter of the same type. Rogue's Passage, it's a combat-based deck, so Rogue's Passage is just an absolute must because you want to get damage in unblocked. Demolition Field, taps to add a colorless, and then you can pay 2 and tap it and sack it to destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls, and then they have to search their library for a basic land and put it into play, but you also get to search your deck for a basic land and put it into play. Reliquary Tower, it's in there because of the no maximum hand size clause, and that is necessary because I did put a lot of things that'll put cards into your hand and draw you cards. That is definitely necessary for this to be in there. And then the rest is just basic plains and forests. Next, I'm going to show you the ramp that I've chosen for this build. It's actually a mix between rocks and actual ramp that green has. So we start off with a Soul Ring, because it's really good. Obviously, it's in every deck. And an Arcane Signet, because we're a 2-color deck, and it's 2 to cast Mana Rock, so it's really good. Rampant Growth is a 2 to cast sorcery. It lets you go get a basic land and put it into play tapped, so it thins your deck out. Same thing with Nature's Lore. It's 2 to cast. It lets you go search for a forest card and put it onto the battlefield, not tapped. Then you got Farseek. It lets you go search for anything but a forest, so an island, a swamp, a plains, or a mountain, and put it into play tapped. And then you've got 2 cards that are very similar, Cultivate and Kodama's Reach. Both of them let you search your deck for 2 lands, put one into play tapped and the other one into your hand, so it thins out your deck very well. Next, I want to show you the heart of the deck, which is the creatures. Remember that this is a human tribal-based deck, so I'm going to start off by showing you the humans, and then I'm going to go into the non-humans, so why don't we just get into it. We start off with Chaplain of Alms. It's a 1-cast, 1/1 first striker with Ward 1, but it has Disturb, so if it's in your graveyard, you can actually cast it from your graveyard for the Disturb cost, and that's the important part here, is because it becomes a 2/1 flying first striker, but it gives each creature you control Ward 1, which is really good protection. So we start with that. Then I have Hopeful Initiate in here. It's a 1-cast 1/2 with Training, which is the same ability that the commander of this deck has. And then you can pay 3 and remove 2 +1/+1 counters from among creatures that you control to destroy target artifact or enchantment. So it's good removal, and there are plenty of +1/+1 counters to go around here, so that shouldn't be a problem. Next, Ambitious Farmhand is a 2-cast 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic Plains card, reveal it, and put it in your hand, which it's not ramp, it's mana fixing, but at least it gets it out of your deck to thin it out. Then it has an ability for Coven. Its Coven cost is 2 white and 1, and you can transform it if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, and then at that point, it becomes a 3/3 lifelinking human. That's not too exciting. The most exciting part of this is to thin your deck out of the land, but at least you get a nice big 3/3 body. Dauntless Dismantler is a 2-cast 1/4 that artifacts your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped, and that's really good against certain things like treasure tokens, because that actually renders them useless as far as ramp goes, because they come into play tapped. They can't just tap them and sack them to get the mana. Then it also has an ability that says for double X and white, you can sacrifice the Dismantler and destroy each artifact with a mana value of X. The cool part here is I have a couple of cards in here that are graveyard recursion, so you may be able to use that a couple times in a game. Luminarch Aspirant is a 2-cast 1/1 that simply just puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control at the beginning of combat. Nothing too spectacular, but it's very helpful for accumulating +1/+1 counters. Thalia's Lieutenant is a 2-cast 1/1 that when it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on each other human you control. And then when another human enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Thalia's Lieutenant. This is one of the better cards in the deck and actually helps springboard a lot of the +1/+1 counter shenanigans that you're going to have. Next is Hanweir Militia Captain, 2-cast 2/2. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more creatures, you transform it, and it transforms into this, which is a star creature, that the stars are equal to the amount of creatures you control. And then, at the beginning of your end step, you put a 1/1 white and black human cleric creature token on the battlefield. So it creates humans for you, which is absolutely what this deck wants completely. Next is Absent Falconer. It's a 3-cast 2/3. It has an ability called Outlast. Its Outlast ability says you can pay 1 white and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature as a sorcery, and then each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has flying, which is very important because you want to be able to block other people's flying creatures, or you want to be able to fly over opponents' ground creatures to get damage through. Devout Chaplain, 3-cast 2/2. You can tap it and tap 2 untapped humans you control to exile target artifact or enchantment. So more removal, only this time it's exile instead of destroy. And you should have plenty of human creatures to do that with. Gavany Dawnguard, it's 3-cast for a 3/3 with Ward 1 itself, and then if it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as it enters the battlefield, and then whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, look at the top 4 cards of your library, and you may reveal a creature card with a mana value of 3 or less from among them, and put it in your hand. So it's definitely nice to get the cards in your hand, and you can do it anytime the day and night cycle switches. Custody Soulcaller, 3-cast 1/2 with Melee. Melee says that whenever this creature attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each opponent that you attacked this combat. So if you have 3 opponents, and you attacked all 3, it will get 3/3. And then whenever it attacks, return target creature card with a mana value of X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of players that were attacked with a creature this turn, or this combat. So, like I said, graveyard recursion, you can go ahead and get up to, depending on how many opponents you have. If you play more than a 4-man pod, then it gets a little nuts anyway. But you can go ahead and get something that is 3 mana value or less and bring it back into play. Adeline Resplendent Cathar, 3-cast for a star 4 vigilant creature. So vigilance means that it doesn't tap to attack. Adeline Cathar's power is equal to the number of creatures that you control, so the more creatures you control, the better for her. And then it says, whenever you attack, for each opponent, create a 1/1 white human creature token that's tapped and attacking that player or planeswalker they control. One thing I want to note here is that it says whenever you attack, not everyone Adeline attacks. So keep that in mind. All your other stuff attacking also triggers it. Gold Knight Commander is a 4-cast 2/2 that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So if you cast 2 creatures or you have 2 creatures enter the battlefield and everything gets +2/+2, if later in the turn you have another creature enter, that last creature doesn't get the original bonuses that were given by the first 2 creatures. Keep that in mind. Courageous Outrider is a 4-cast 3/4 that says when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a human card from among them, and then put it into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So it's getting cards into your hand, specifically humans, which is what this deck wants to do. Parhelion Patrol, 4-cast 2/3 flying vigilant creature, so it doesn't have to attack either. It has Mentor, and Mentor says when this creature attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature with a lesser power, so adding more tokens, which is what this deck wants to really do. Absent Battle Priest is a 4-cast 3/2. Also has Outlast, like the original one that I showed you earlier. This one says for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it, it has lifelink, which is really good to keep you alive. Palace Jailer is a 4-cast 2/2 that when it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch, and I will put the rules for the Monarch ability up on the screen for you to read. And it says when it enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until an opponent it becomes the Monarch. And the reason why it says until that is because the Monarch can switch hands multiple times in a game. Kong Ming Sleeping Dragon is a 4-cast 2/2 that is a human with an Anthem ability, and that's the only reason it's in here. So it's a human that gives all other creatures you control +1/+1, which is great for a human type of tribal deck. Odric Master Tactician is a 4-cast 3/4 with first strike, and then whenever it and at least 3 other creatures attack, you choose which creatures block this combat and how they block. So you can choose to have creatures not block, or you can have their creatures block in ways that are not very beneficial for them, so they'll lose things that you want them to lose. It's actually pretty cool for a deck that's based on combat tricks and stuff. Heron Blade Elite is a 3-cast 1/1 with Vigilance that says whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then it taps to add X mana of any one color, where X is Heron Blade's power, which is great if you can find ways to untap it and just add a whole bunch of mana. Champion of Lambholt is a 3-cast 1/1 that says creatures with power less than the Champion of Lambholt's power can't block creatures that you control. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So the higher Champion of Lambholt's power is, the less creatures that your opponents will be able to block. Doomscar Warrior is a 4-cast 4/3 with backup 1. Trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or battle, look at that many cards from the top of your library, and you may reveal a creature or a land card from among them and put it into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Backup 1 means that when it comes into play, you can put a +1/+1 counter on either another creature or itself. If you've put the +1/+1 counter on another creature, it gains all the abilities that come after it. So that creature will also gain Trample and the ability to put a card in your hand. If you put the +1/+1 counter on the Doomscar Warrior, it just is a +1/+1 counter and does not get a repeat of the abilities. Cloaked Cadet is a 5-cast 2/4 with training, so we should know about training from the commander. And it says whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on one or more humans you control, you draw a card, and this ability triggers only once each turn. But realize it triggers on anybody else's turn once at least too, so if you have a way to put counters on things on other people's turns, you will draw cards on their turn too. Catilda Dawnheart Prime is a 2-cast 1/1, has protection from werewolves, which isn't probably that relevant right now, but the other abilities are. It says that human creatures you control have tap to add 1 mana of any color of that creature's colors. So for instance, Catilda would tap to add either a white or a green, and other creatures that are just green would tap to add green, and others that are white would just tap to add white. Then it has this other ability that for 6, you can tap it and put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, which is very helpful in a deck based around counters. King Darien, and I think that says 53. If I'm not very up on my Roman numerals, but I think that's 53. Is a 3-cast 2/3 that is an Anthem creature. It gives all other creatures you control +1/+1. Has this cool ability that for 5, and it's every 5 you put into it because it's not a tap. You put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then you create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. Realize that I just showed you a thing that gives other humans you control the ability to tap for mana, which is good and helps with abilities like this. Then the last thing it has on here is to sacrifice it, and you can have creature tokens you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Juniper Order Ranger is a 5-cast 2/4. It's a human knight that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature and on Juniper Order Ranger, so we're just having +1/+1 counters fly all over the place. Kyler Sigarden Emissary is a 5-cast 2/2. It says whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Kyler, and then other humans you control get +1/+1 for each counter on Kyler. So you're getting some really big creatures now. And the last human is Maja Bredegard Protector, who I actually make a deck around
as one of my budget decks. I love this card. It's a 5 to cast 2/3. That's an Anthem creature, so it gives all other creatures you control +1/+1. And whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you create a 1/1 white human warrior creature token. So lots of token creation and buffing. Now I'll show you the non-human creatures. Now, while they're not humans, they do help humans in some way, shape, or form. So, Usher of the Fallen is a 1 to cast 2/1 that boasts, and that means that for 1 white and 1 event, you can create a 1/1 human warrior creature token. However, you can only use boast abilities if the creature attacked and only once a turn. So at least it creates humans for you. Then we have Shalai, Voice of Plenty, which is a 4 to cast 3/4 flying angel that gives you, planeswalkers you control, and other creatures you control hexproof, which is great for protection, obviously. And then it has an even better ability that gives all creatures you control +1/+1 counters if you pay 2 green and 4. So for every 6 you put into it, you get a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Kutzel Malamet Exemplar is a 3 to cast 3/3 cat warrior, so it's not a human, but the 2 abilities it has are really helpful for a deck like this. It says that your opponents can't cast spells during your turn, which is super helpful for you to do stuff on your turn and nobody can really interrupt you. And then whenever one or more creatures that you control, each with a power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So anything that has a higher power than the one that's printed on the card will allow you to draw a card if you hit a player. So that's pretty cool too. Both of those abilities are pretty good. Next is Sigarda, Champion of Light. This one is 4 to cast for a 4/4 flying trampler that gives humans you control +1/+1. So it's an Anthem effect for humans only. And then it has a Coven ability. It says whenever Sigarda attacks, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you may reveal a human creature card from among them and put it into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So getting more cards in your hand, and this one actually looks for humans specifically, which is probably what you're going to search for anyway. And the last creature I have up for this deck is Sigarda, Heron's Grace. 5 to cast 4/5 flyer. It's an angel as well. And then it says you and humans you control have hexproof, so it doesn't give everything hexproof like the other one does. And then it has a neat ability that says for every 2 that you pay, you can exile a card from your own graveyard to create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So you're not going to actually do your own creatures, you're not going to exile them because you have a possibility of getting them back from the grave. But you will have some other things like sorceries and instants that you will be able to target to get more creatures on the board. Now I want to show you the utility part of the deck. So it's cut up into 3 sections. I've got, removal, card draw, quasi-card draw, and then other. So I'll start off with the removal. We'll start off with some artifact and enchantment removal. Nature's Claim, it's 1 to cast, and then it destroys an artifact or enchantment, and its controller gains 4 life, which is negligible in a deck that probably can hit pretty hard. We also have Return to Nature, it's 2 to cast, it destroys an artifact, enchantment, or exiles a card from a graveyard. And then we have Wilt, which is 2 to cast as well, that also destroys an artifact or enchantment, but if you don't need any artifact or enchantment removal, you can cycle it away to draw a card, which may get you to other answers. And then I believe this is the last one, Sundering Growth. It has hybrid green and white, so you can pay either 2 green, 2 white, or 1 white and 1 green, and it destroys target artifact or enchantment, and then you populate, which is to say that you put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of a creature token you already control. So it actually is double duty. It's removal and it's a token creator, so it's pretty nice. Some creature removal, we have Swords to Plowshares. We all know about that. It's 1 to cast, it exiles a creature, and then the controller gains life, so that's negligible too. Path to Exile exiles a creature as well for 1. Its controller may then search their library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. And then we have some removal of things that are anything. So Vanish into Eternity is 3 to cast and exiles a non-land permanent. However, if you target a creature, it costs 3 more. So you can remove anything except for a land, and then if you go to remove a creature, it's going to cost you 3 more. Then we have 2 similar cards, Generous Gift and Beast Within. Both cost 3 and both pretty much do the same thing. They both destroy a permanent, and then the controller creates either a 3/3 green elephant for the Generous Gift or a 3/3 beast token for the Beast Within. The good thing about this card is they both say destroy target permanent. It does not specify non-land, so you can destroy anything on the board that's able to be targeted. So good stuff there. Then we're going to move on to card draw / quasi-card draw. We start off with Seek the Wilds. It's 2 to cast and allows you to look at the top 4 cards of your library, and then you may reveal a creature or land card from among them and put it into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Again, it puts cards in your hand. It's not card draw, it's quasi-card draw, so things that hurt you for drawing cards don't get affected by this. Lead the Stampede lets you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal any number of creature cards from among them and put the revealed cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. The hope here is to hit 5 creatures in a row, but let's just be honest, the odds of that are very low. Harmonize is actually card draw. It's a 4 to cast sorcery that lets you just draw 3 cards. It's one of the better ones in the game, so that's got to go in there. Garruk's Uprising is a 3 to cast enchantment that says when it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. Then it gives all creatures you control trample, which is very nice. It does everything you need for this deck, so it gives your creatures the ability to hit when they're chump blocked. Then it says whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. Now, I have a lot of Anthem-style effects in this deck, so all your little 1/1 tokens may enter as not just 4/4s, but maybe even 5/5s and 6/6s, allowing you to draw cards off of the Garruk's Uprising. And then we have Lead the Rest. It's a 4-cast enchantment that says whenever a human you control dies, you draw a card. More card draw. And then whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, you gain 2 life, so hopefully it helps keep you alive to accomplish what you need to do. And then this is just pure utility stuff. So it's all going to have different things it does. We start with Sanctuary Lockdown. It's a 3-cast enchantment that gives all of your creatures that are humans a buff of +1/+1. And then it has this neat ability here that you can pay 2 and tap 2 untapped humans that you control to tap target creature and opponent controls. That doesn't sound very powerful, but think about this. If you have as many humans as I think that this deck will probably end up creating, you'll be able to lock down blockers so they can't block. But the other important thing is, creatures that have tap abilities, you'll force your opponent to use that tap ability when they don't want to, or it's not beneficial for them. So keep that in mind. Triumph of the Hordes is a game ender. It is a 4-cast sorcery that says until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 and trample and infect until end of turn, which is really good because you know that you only need to hit somebody for 10 poison to actually beat them. So this, for some of the size of the creatures that they're going to have come up on this deck, that should be a game ender. If that's not enough, Overwhelming Stampede should do the trick. So it's a 5-cast sorcery that says until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So if you have a 5/5 out, all of your creatures are getting +5/+5 and trample. That should end the game. If the Triumph of the Hordes didn't, it should at least help the Triumph of the Hordes, or you can play them separately and they'll both should end the game. Lightning Greaves, it's to protect your commander or anything you find important on the board that's a creature. It's a 2-cast equipment that equips for 0, so you can play it and then equip it. I think before you pass priority, you can equip it so you can protect something right away. And then the equipped creature gets haste and shroud, so very good protection. The last utility card will be a Johnny the Great-Hearted. It's a 4-cast planeswalker that enters play with 5 loyalty counters. The reason this is in here is for the static ability of creatures you control have vigilance. The one main weakness of a combat-based deck is usually that you attack, but you never have anybody left back to block. This ensures you have both. Then it has 2, somewhat okay abilities. You can uptick it 1 loyalty for gaining 3 life, or you can downtick it 2 loyalty to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And the last part doesn't matter because it's the only planeswalker in the deck, but you can also add a loyalty counter to each planeswalker you control. But it's great for adding +1/+1 counters to things. The last thing I'm going to show you is 2 additional ways for this deck to win. So I'm going to show you the first one is Halo Fountain. I've actually given this as an upgrade option for the Warhammer 40k decks. I'm going to throw it in this deck because it really is a good win con. It's a 3-cast artifact that has 3 abilities. The first one is you pay a white and tap it to untap a tapped creature you control to create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. So I mentioned to you that this is a combat-based deck, so you're going to be turning dudes sideways to win. But there's also ways to unturn them to win. So that's one. It helps create more tokens for you. There's also the ability that you pay 2 white and tap it to untap 2 tapped creatures you control to draw a card so you can draw more answers. Or the win con of this is to pay 5 white, tap it, and untap 15 tapped creatures you control, and you just win the game. So it's a nice little win con that is in addition to being able to use combat. And the last thing that I'm going to show you is an infinite damage combo that is the second non-combat damage-based way that this deck can win. This combo uses 3 cards that individually fit the theme of the deck, but when combined together will win you the game on the spot. It starts with an innocent-looking card, Basri's Lieutenant. Basri's Lieutenant is a 4-cast 3/4 with 4 abilities. Vigilance, protection from multicolored, and the ability to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature when it enters play. They're all good and dandy. It's that last ability that starts the combo. It says that whenever Basri's Lieutenant or another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, you create a 2/2 white knight creature token with Vigilance. Now, with that last ability in mind, you add something like Cathar's Crusade into the mix, which is a 5-cast enchantment that states whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that you control. With the Crusade out, it ensures that any creature that enters play will now be able to trigger Basri's Lieutenant's token creating ability if it dies. Then we just need a way for the tokens to die. That's where Blasting Station comes in. Blasting Station is a 30-cast artifact that you can tap and sacrifice a creature to have it deal 1 damage to any target, and whenever a creature comes into play, you may untap the Blasting Station. Now, since every time a creature that you control dying will trigger the Basri's Lieutenant's token creating ability, it will end up untapping the Blasting Station each time you activate it, resulting in infinite damage, which you can throw at your opponents 1 point at a time. As I stated earlier, each piece of this combo fits well into the deck individually, but together they definitely wreak some havoc. If you need any explanation on how this combination works, just put a message in the comment section and I will explain it further if needed.
And there you have it, my friends. A Torens, Fist of the Angels, Human Tribal, Token Creation, and +1/+1 counter build on just over a $100 budget that was a gift for someone for this holiday season. The task I was given was to make a deck that could win convincingly, but not so convincingly that they may lose their friends. I believe I was able to come up with a deck that does exactly just that. Honestly, it's hard to get mad at someone for playing a deck that's combat-based and considered more fair to play against than a lot of the other decks that are out there. So that wraps it up for the final long-form video that I'll be doing for 2023. Next week starts the new year, and for the first few months of 2024, I will continue catching up on the unboxing and upgrade guides for the WotC precons that were released throughout 2023. I'll be starting the year off with the Phyrexia All-Will-Be-One precons, which look pretty good, so be sure to check back next Friday for that. Thanks for watching, have a happy new year, and I will see you all next year.